Captain Marcus Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the massive Zephyrian capital ship grow larger in the viewport. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever built, its crystalline hull shimmering with patterns of light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. After 3 years of long-distance communications and careful negotiations, this was humanity's first face-to-face diplomatic mission with an alien civilization. Marcus adjusted his formal uniform one final time. The weight of Earth's future pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The approaching extragalactic threat had been detected by both human and Zephyrian deep space sensors 6 months ago. A massive fleet of unknown origin was heading toward their galaxy, destroying everything in its path. Humanity needed allies, and more importantly, they needed the Zephyrian hyperspace technology that could give Earth's forces the mobility to fight effectively. "Captain, we're receiving docking clearance," reported Lieutenant Sarah Torres from the communications station. Her voice carried the same tension that Marcus felt. Everyone on the ship knew how critical this mission was. "Take us in, Lieutenant," Marcus replied, watching as the Zephyrian docking bay opened like a blooming flower. The engineering behind it was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The docking process was smooth, guided by Zephyrian technology that seemed to read the intentions of their ship's systems. As the airlock sealed and atmosphere equalized, Marcus took a deep breath. The next few hours would determine whether humanity had a future in the coming war. The airlock opened to reveal 3 Zephyrian escorts waiting in the corridor beyond. They were tall and graceful, their skin bearing intricate patterns that shifted color slowly like living tattoos. Their large eyes regarded the human delegation with what Marcus hoped was curiosity rather than contempt. "Welcome, Captain Chen, of Earth," the lead Zephyrian said, his voice carrying musical undertones. "I am Commander Thalen. The Imperial Court awaits your presence." Marcus followed the escorts through corridors that seemed grown rather than built. The walls curved organically, and bioluminescent panels provided soft, changing light. Other Zephyrians they passed stopped to stare at the human delegation with expressions that were difficult to read. The throne room was vast, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. Dozens of Zephyrian nobles stood in precise formations, their colorful patterns creating a mesmerizing display. At the center, on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal, sat Emperor Valdris. His presence was commanding, and the patterns on his skin moved with slow, deliberate rhythm. "Captain Marcus Chen of the human species," the Emperor's voice resonated through the chamber without amplification. "You come seeking alliance in the face of the approaching darkness." Marcus stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Imperial Majesty, humanity faces the same threat as the Zephyrian Empire. We believe our species could be stronger together than apart." "Humans," the Emperor mused, his patterns shifting to deeper blues and purples. "A young species, barely beyond their birthworld's atmosphere. What could you possibly offer the Zephyrian Empire?" Before Marcus could respond, movement caught his eye. A figure had entered from a side corridor, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. She was clearly Zephyrian royalty, judging by the elaborate ceremonial clothing and the deference shown by nearby nobles. But it was more than her status that captured his attention. Princess Lirelai moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy gravity. Her skin bore patterns more intricate than any Marcus had seen, shifting through shades of silver and gold that seemed to capture and reflect the chamber's light. Her eyes, large and luminous like all Zephyrians, held an intelligence and warmth that transcended species barriers. Marcus found himself staring, completely forgetting the diplomatic protocols he had memorized. The princess took her place near the Emperor's throne, and Marcus noticed how her patterns seemed to brighten slightly when their eyes met across the chamber. "Captain Chen," the Emperor continued, apparently unaware of Marcus's distraction. "Your species is known for violence and chaos. Your history is filled with wars among your own kind. Why should we trust such beings with our advanced technology?" Marcus forced himself to focus on the Emperor's words, but his eyes kept drifting to Princess Lirelai. There was something about her that seemed different from the other Zephyrians. while the nobles around her maintained expressions of cool superiority. Her face showed what appeared to be genuine interest in the proceedings. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, drawing on his diplomatic training. "Humanity's past conflicts have taught us the value of cooperation. We've learned to unite against common threats. Our diversity of thought and approach could complement Zephyrian precision and technology." Several nobles made sounds that Marcus interpreted as skeptical. Their patterns shifted to darker colors. That seemed to indicate disapproval. The Emperor's own patterns remained neutral, neither approving nor dismissing. Princess Lyrelei stepped forward. "Father, might I address our guests?" The Emperor gestured for her to proceed. When she spoke, her voice was clearer and more melodious than any human voice Marcus had ever heard. "Captain Chen, we have studied your species' transmissions and historical records. Humans show remarkable adaptability and creativity in crisis situations. These traits intrigue us." Marcus felt his heart rate increase as she spoke directly to him. The way she pronounced his name, with the musical quality of the Zephyrian language, made it sound almost like poetry. "Thank you, Your Highness," Marcus replied, trying to maintain professional composure. "Humanity values the opportunity to learn from Zephyrian wisdom and experience." As he spoke, Marcus noticed that Princess Lyrelei's patterns were shifting to warmer colors. Her eyes seemed to study his face with intense curiosity, as if trying to understand something beyond mere words. The formal presentations continued for another hour. Marcus delivered his prepared speech about human technological capabilities and strategic thinking. The Emperor and his advisors asked pointed questions about human reliability and long-term intentions. Throughout the proceedings, Marcus found his attention constantly drawn to Princess Lyrelei. During a brief recess, as the nobles discussed among themselves in their rapid musical language, Marcus stood near one of the great windows overlooking the Zephyrian homeworld. The planet below was a masterpiece of controlled beauty, with cities that sparkled like jewels connected by streams of light. Princess Lyrelei approached, having somehow moved through the crowd without Marcus noticing. Up close, her presence was even more overwhelming. Her patterns shifted constantly, creating an almost hypnotic display. "Your homeworld is beautiful beyond description," Marcus said softly. "Earth interests us as well," she replied. "A world shaped by natural forces rather than careful design. We find the concept fascinating." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the play of light across the planet's surface. Marcus felt a connection he couldn't explain, something that transcended the barriers of species and culture. "Captain," Princess Lyrelei said quietly, "may I ask you something personal?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "What do humans call the emotion that draws two beings together across impossible differences?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked into her luminous eyes and saw something that seemed almost vulnerable beneath her royal composure. "We call it love," he said simply. Her patterns shifted to the warmest colors he had seen yet, like sunrise breaking over a peaceful ocean. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the moment, by the impossible beauty of this alien princess who seemed genuinely interested in understanding humanity. Without thinking, he whispered words that came from his heart, rather than his diplomatic training. "I wish I could marry her." The words were barely audible, meant for no one but himself. But Princess Lyrelei's head turned sharply toward him, her patterns suddenly blazing with brilliant light. "My answer is yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over the throne room. Marcus realized with growing horror that every Zephyrian in the chamber was staring at them. The Emperor had risen from his throne, his patterns dark with what was unmistakably anger. The nobles around the room were making sounds of shock and outrage. Marcus understood that he had just created a diplomatic crisis that could doom both species. The silence in the throne room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus felt the weight of hundreds of Zephyrian eyes upon him, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to darker, more aggressive colors. The Emperor's skin had turned deep, crimson with veins of black, a display that needed no translation. Impossible, Emperor Valdris said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. A member of the lower species dares to propose marriage to Zephyrian royalty? Marcus opened his mouth to explain, to somehow salvage the situation, but Princess Lyrelei stepped forward before he could speak. Her patterns had stabilized into confident gold and silver spirals. "Father, I have accepted his proposal," she said, with calm dignity. "By ancient law, this makes Captain Chen a suitor for the royal bloodline." The throne room erupted in chaos. Nobles began shouting in their musical language, their patterns flashing angry reds and purples. Several of the younger courtiers moved closer, their postures threatening. Marcus instinctively reached for his sidearm before remembering that weapons had been left on his ship as a sign of peaceful intent. "Silence." The Emperor's voice boomed through the chamber, and the nobles immediately fell quiet, his gaze fixed on Marcus with predatory intensity. "You dare to court my daughter? You whose species has barely learned to leave their birth world?" "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect," Marcus began, but the Emperor cut him off with a gesture. "The insult has been given and accepted. By our most ancient laws, you have claimed the right to prove your worthiness for the royal bloodline." The Emperor's patterns shifted to deep blue. The color Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "Very well, human. If you believe your species worthy to join with Zephyrian nobility, you will face the trials of ascension." A collective gasp arose from the assembled nobles. Even Princess Lyrelei's patterns flickered with what appeared to be surprise and concern. "Father, the trials have not been attempted by an outsider in over 1,000 years," she said quietly. "Precisely," the Emperor replied coldly. "They were designed to test Zephyrian nobles for the highest positions in our society. If this human succeeds, he will have proven his species' worth. If he fails..." The Emperor let the implication hang in the air. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature of the throne room. "What do these trials involve, Your Majesty?" "3 challenges that test the fundamental qualities required of Zephyrian leadership," the Emperor explained, seeming to relish Marcus's discomfort. "The trial of mind, where you must solve the puzzle of infinite echoes that has challenged our greatest scholars for a millennium. The trial of body, where you must survive 7 days in the Wraithlands, our most dangerous wilderness. And the trial of spirit, where you must commune with the ancestor minds and gain their blessing." Each trial sounded impossible for a human. The Zephyrians were telepathic, had different physical capabilities, and possessed spiritual connections that humans couldn't even comprehend. Marcus realized this wasn't just a challenge but a sophisticated form of execution, disguised as honor. "I accept," Marcus said firmly. He caught Princess Lyrelei's eye and saw approval mixed with worry in her expression. "Very well," the Emperor said. "You have 3 days to prepare. The trials will begin at the next dawn cycle." As the formal court session ended, Marcus found himself escorted to quarters in the royal wing of the massive ship. The rooms were beautiful but clearly designed for Zephyrian physiology. The bed was too long, the lighting controls responded to touch patterns he couldn't replicate, and the food synthesizers produced meals that were nutritionally adequate but tasted like flavored paste. On the second day of preparation, Marcus was studying Zephyrian historical texts when his door chimed softly. He opened it to find Princess Lyrelei standing in the corridor, looking around nervously. "Your Highness," Marcus said, stepping aside to let her enter. "This is unexpected." "I cannot stay long," she said, her patterns shifting to muted colors that Marcus had learned indicated secrecy. "I wanted to explain what you have gotten yourself into. I'm beginning to understand that these trials are meant to be impossible for a human." "Not impossible," she corrected, moving to stand near the room's viewing port, "but designed for beings with abilities you do not possess. The puzzle of infinite echoes requires telepathic connection to quantum probability matrices. The Wraithlands are filled with creatures that hunt by sensing Zephyrian bioelectric patterns, and the ancestor minds communicate through genetic memory pathways that humans do not have." Marcus felt his heart sink. Then why did you accept my proposal? Princess Lyrelei turned to face him, her patterns brightening to warm gold. Because, in studying your species, I discovered something remarkable. Humans possess qualities that we have bred out of our people over millennia of controlled evolution. Your unpredictability, your emotional decision-making, your ability to find solutions outside established patterns. These traits fascinate me. She moved closer, and Marcus caught a faint scent like ozone in flowers. More than that, I have been watching you since your arrival. The way you treat your subordinates with respect rather than authority. The way you see beauty in our world rather than just strategic value. The way you look at me not as an alien curiosity, but as an individual. In Zephyrian society, marriages are arranged for genetic optimization and political advantage, she continued. I have never been asked what I want, who I might choose to love. When you whispered your wish, I heard something I had never experienced before. The sound of someone wanting me for myself, rather than my bloodline or position. Marcus felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm his diplomatic composure. Even if I somehow survive these trials, what kind of future could we have? I'm human, your Zephyrian royalty. That is why you must succeed, she said softly. Not just for us, but for both our species. The approaching threat requires new thinking, new approaches. A union between our peoples could create something stronger than either alone. Over the next day, Princess Lyrelei visited twice more, each time bringing information that might help Marcus survive the trials. She explained the basic principles behind Zephyrian telepathic technology, described the behavioral patterns of Wraithland creatures, and shared what little she knew about the ancestor mind rituals. You are taking enormous risks to help me, Marcus observed during her final visit. My father believes I am acting on romantic impulse, she replied, her patterns showing amusement. He does not realize that I have been studying human culture and philosophy for years. Your concepts of individual choice and personal freedom challenge everything our society has built itself upon. You could have chosen any Zephyrian noble, Marcus said. Why risk everything for a human you barely know? Princess Lyrelei was quiet for a long moment, her patterns cycling through complex combinations of color. Because you are the first being I have ever met who saw me as Lyrelei rather than Princess Lyrelei. When you whispered that wish, you were not thinking about political advantage or genetic compatibility. You simply saw someone you wanted to spend your life with. As the dawn of the trials approached, Marcus felt as prepared as a human could be for challenges designed for an alien species. But more than that, he felt motivated by something beyond duty or survival. The princess had shown him a glimpse of what cooperation between their species could achieve. The morning of the first trial arrived with the artificial dawn cycle of the Zephyrian ship. Marcus was escorted to a vast chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with energy. Dozens of Zephyrian nobles had gathered to witness what they clearly expected to be his failure. Emperor Valdris stood before a towering crystal matrix that pulsed with complex patterns of light. Captain Chen, you will now face the trial of mind. Solve the puzzle of infinite echoes and you may proceed to the second trial. Fail, and you will be returned to your ship with the understanding that humans are not ready for true partnership with the Zephyrian Empire. Marcus approached the crystal matrix knowing that his next actions would determine not only his fate, but potentially the future of two species facing an existential threat. The crystal matrix towered above Marcus like a frozen waterfall of light. Thousands of crystalline nodes pulsed with different colors and rhythms, creating patterns that seemed to shift just as his eyes began to track them. The puzzle of infinite echoes had challenged Zephyrian scholars for a millennium, and now a human was expected to solve it in a matter of hours. Emperor Valdris gestured toward the crystal structure. The puzzle requires you to align the quantum probability matrices by establishing telepathic resonance with the core consciousness. Each crystal node represents a different possibility across infinite dimensions. You must find the single pathway that harmonizes all possibilities into one truth. Marcus studied the massive construct, feeling completely out of his depth. Around the chamber, Zephyrian nobles whispered among themselves, their patterns displaying colors that clearly indicated they expected him to fail within minutes. Only Princess Lyrelai remained silent, her patterns neutral, but her eyes fixed on Marcus with intense concentration. He approached the first cluster of crystals and placed his hands on the smooth surfaces as he had seen Zephyrian scholars do in the historical recordings. Nothing happened. The crystals continued their complex dance of light without acknowledging his presence. Several nobles made sounds that were unmistakably laughter. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to clear his mind, reaching for some kind of mental connection with the crystals. Still nothing. The Zephyrian method required telepathic abilities that humans simply did not possess. After an hour of failed attempts, Marcus stepped back and studied the puzzle from a different angle. If he couldn't solve it the Zephyrian way, perhaps there was another approach. The patterns of light in the crystals reminded him of something from his engineering background. Quantum cascade equations that he had studied at the academy. He began walking around the entire structure, observing how the light patterns moved through the crystal network. Each node seemed to receive input from multiple sources and generate output that affected other nodes. It was like a massive three-dimensional computer processing countless calculations simultaneously. Marcus noticed something the Zephyrian observers had missed. While they focused on telepathic connection to individual crystals, they weren't seeing the mathematical relationships between the patterns. The puzzle wasn't just about consciousness and spiritual connection. It was about finding the underlying mathematical harmony. He pulled out his personal tablet and began recording the light patterns, tracking their timing and intensity. The device wasn't designed for this kind of analysis, but Marcus improvised, writing code on the spot to process the visual data. Hours passed as he mapped the relationships between different sections of the crystal matrix. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the patterns weren't random or mystical. They were following quantum mechanical principles that could be calculated using human mathematics. The infinite possibilities were actually finite probability states that could be solved through computational analysis rather than telepathic intuition. Working frantically, Marcus wrote algorithms that predicted how changes in one section would cascade through the entire system. He identified the critical nodes that served as control points for the whole network. When he finally approached the central crystal and input his calculated sequence by physically manipulating the control crystals, the entire matrix suddenly synchronized. The chaotic light patterns resolved into a single, beautiful wave of golden illumination that flowed through every crystal in perfect harmony. The chamber fell completely silent as Zephyrians stared in amazement at something they had never seen before. "Impossible," whispered one of the elder scholars. "The puzzle has been solved, but not through telepathic communion." "How?" Marcus was exhausted but triumphant. "I used mathematical analysis instead of mental connection. The patterns follow quantum probability laws that can be calculated rather than sensed." Emperor Valdris studied the now harmonized crystal matrix with an unreadable expression. His patterns had shifted to deep purple, which Marcus had learned indicated profound contemplation. "You have succeeded through methods unknown to our people. This is unexpected." Princess Lyrelai stepped forward, her patterns bright with excitement. "Father, this demonstrates exactly what I hoped. Human approaches complement our own. Where we rely on innate abilities, they use learned skills and creative problem-solving. One trial does not prove worthiness," the Emperor replied coldly. But Marcus noticed his patterns had shifted to slightly warmer colors. Prepare for the trial of body. The next day, Marcus found himself standing at the edge of the Wraithlands through the viewing ports of a transport ship. The landscape below looked like something from a nightmare. Twisted spires of dark rock jutted from mist-covered ground, and strange lights flickered in the perpetual twilight. Even through the ship's sensors, Marcus could see movement among the shadows that suggested large predators. "The Wraithlands exist in a state of dimensional instability," Commander Thalon explained as they descended toward the drop zone. "Creatures here have evolved to hunt by sensing bioelectric patterns. They are particularly attracted to Zephyrian neural activity, but human brainwaves may confuse them or make you more vulnerable. We do not know." Marcus was given basic survival equipment adapted for human physiology and a beacon that would activate after 7 days to signal for pickup, if he survived that long. The moment he stepped off the transport onto the alien soil, Marcus felt the wrongness of the place. The air felt thick and electric, making his skin tingle unpleasantly. Gravity was slightly stronger than Earth normal, and the perpetual dim light made it difficult to judge distances. Within hours, Marcus encountered his first Wraithland predator. The creature was unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history, resembling a cross between a giant spider and a ray of light. It moved through the mist like liquid electricity, and Marcus could feel it probing at the edges of his consciousness with alien senses. But instead of attacking immediately, the creature seemed confused. It circled Marcus for several minutes, before retreating into the mist. Marcus realized that his human neural patterns were indeed different enough to confuse the local predators. They could sense him, but couldn't quite categorize him as either prey or threat. Over the following days, Marcus learned to use this confusion to his advantage. When approached by the various nightmare creatures that inhabited the Wraithlands, he would deliberately think in patterns that were as un-Zephyrian as possible: human memories, mathematical equations, snatches of old Earth songs. The creatures would probe his mind, become confused by the alien thought patterns, and eventually retreat. By the 4th day, Marcus had mapped out safe routes through the territory and found sources of water that weren't contaminated by the strange energies that permeated the region. He even discovered edible plants that his human digestive system could process, something that would have been impossible for a Zephyrian. The real test came on the 6th day, when Marcus encountered a pack of hunters unlike the others. These creatures were more intelligent, more persistent. They had learned to recognize his unusual mental signature and were actively stalking him. Marcus found himself running through the twisted landscape, using every survival skill he had learned in military training. The pursuit lasted most of the night. When dawn broke over the Wraithlands, Marcus was exhausted, injured, but alive. The creatures had given up the hunt, apparently deciding that he wasn't worth the effort. As the pickup beacon activated on schedule, Marcus allowed himself to feel a moment of pride. He had survived 7 days in conditions that had killed Zephyrian nobles. When the transport arrived, Marcus was surprised to see Princess Lyrelei aboard, along with the retrieval team. Her patterns brightened with relief when she saw him emerge from the mist. "The 3rd trial awaits," she said softly, as they lifted off from the nightmare landscape below. "But Captain, what you accomplished down there has already changed how my people view humans. No Zephyrian has ever survived the Wraithlands through cunning alone. Our people rely on telepathic connection to sense and avoid the predators. You succeeded through pure adaptability." Marcus looked down at the receding Wraithlands through the transport's viewports. "Your Highness, I'm beginning to understand something important. These trials aren't just testing whether I'm worthy of Zephyrian nobility. They're revealing that humans and Zephyrians have complementary strengths." "Exactly," she replied. "And that realization terrifies the traditionalists in our society, which is why the final trial will be the most dangerous. The ancestor minds do not welcome change." The chamber of ancestor minds existed in the deepest section of the Zephyrian capital ship, far from the diplomatic quarters and throne rooms where Marcus had spent his previous days. As he descended through levels of increasingly ancient architecture, he noticed the walls becoming more organic, almost alive. Bioluminescent veins pulsed through the surfaces like a vast circulatory system, and the air hummed with energy that made his teeth ache. Princess Lyrelei walked beside him, her patterns displaying muted colors that Marcus had learned indicated deep concern. "The ancestor minds are the preserved consciousness of our greatest leaders from the past 5,000 years, she explained quietly. "They exist in a state between life and death, offering guidance to the living through genetic memory connections, and I'm supposed to commune with them without the genetic connections that make it possible," Marcus said, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. "The ritual has never been attempted by a non-Zephyrian," she admitted. "We do not know what will happen when human consciousness encounters the ancestor minds directly." They reached the chamber entrance, a circular portal that dilated open like an iris. Beyond lay a vast spherical room filled with thousands of glowing pods suspended in midair. Each pod contained what appeared to be a sleeping Zephyrian figure, their bodies preserved in some kind of energy field. The sight was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Emperor Valdris waited at the center of the chamber with several elder priests whose patterns were so complex, they seemed to shift through dimensions Marcus couldn't perceive. "Captain Chen," the Emperor said solemnly, "you will enter the communion trance and seek the blessing of our ancestors. If they accept you, you will gain knowledge that proves your worthiness to join our royal line. If they reject you..." He gestured to several pods that contained figures twisted in expressions of apparent agony. Not all who attempt communion survive the experience. Marcus nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The priests began a ritual chant in ancient Zephyrian, their voices creating harmonics that resonated through the chamber. The pods began to glow brighter, and Marcus could swear he heard whispers at the edge of his perception. "Lie in the communion circle," one of the priests instructed, indicating a ring of crystalline formations on the floor. "Clear your mind and allow the ancestor minds to examine your worthiness." Marcus positioned himself in the center of the crystal circle. The moment his body made contact with the formations, energy coursed through him like electricity. His vision blurred, and suddenly he was no longer in the physical chamber. He found himself floating in a space that defied description, surrounded by thousands of Zephyrian faces that flickered in and out of existence. These were the ancestor minds, and their attention focused on him with crushing intensity. Marcus felt his thoughts being examined, dissected, judged by intelligences that had witnessed millennia of Zephyrian history. The first voice that spoke seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Human, you dare to seek communion with the pure bloodline of Zephyria. Your species is young, chaotic, violent. What wisdom could you possibly offer?" More voices joined in, creating a chorus of disapproval. "Your people wage war against their own kind. You consume your world's resources without thought for the future. You are driven by primitive emotions rather than logical thought." Marcus felt himself being pulled deeper into the communion space, his human consciousness buffeted by alien thoughts and memories. He experienced flashes of Zephyrian history, witnessing their rise from a primitive species to masters of space and time. But something was wrong with the memories. They were too perfect, too controlled. "Wait," Marcus managed to project his thoughts into the communion space. "I'm seeing something you're not showing me, intentionally." The ancestor minds fell silent, their attention sharpening to a painful degree. Marcus realized that his human consciousness, lacking the genetic pathways that normally channeled communion, was accessing the memories through different routes. He was seeing not just the official history, but the suppressed memories, the forgotten truths. In these deeper memories, Marcus saw ancient Zephyrians who looked different from their modern descendants. These early Zephyrians had been more emotional, more creative, more willing to take risks. But over thousands of years of controlled breeding and social engineering, these traits had been systematically eliminated in favor of logic, order, and predictability. "You have lost something precious," Marcus projected into the communion space, his revelation growing stronger. "In your pursuit of perfection, you have bred out the very qualities that made your ancestors great explorers and innovators." The ancestor minds reacted with shock and anger. "Impossible. We have achieved the pinnacle of evolutionary development. Then why haven't you made any major discoveries in the last 1,000 years?" Marcus challenged. "Your technology has stagnated. Your society has become rigid. You've traded growth for stability." Marcus felt the communion space shifting around him as his words struck home. Some of the ancestor voices began to whisper among themselves, and he caught fragments of ancient memories that supported his observations. The early Zephyrians had been risk-takers, dreamers, beings who valued individual expression alongside collective good. One voice spoke above the others, older and more powerful than the rest. "This human sees truly. We have become afraid of the chaos that once drove us to greatness. In our fear of failure, we have also eliminated the possibility of breakthrough. The approaching darkness cannot be defeated through logic alone, Marcus continued, pressing his advantage. It will require the kind of creative, unpredictable thinking that you've bred out of your people, but that still exists in humanity. More. Ancestor voices joined the growing discussion, and Marcus realized he had sparked a debate that had been suppressed for millennia. The ancestor minds were remembering what they had chosen to forget. Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The communion trance shattered as emergency lights flooded the chamber. Princess Lyrelai was at Marcus's side instantly, helping him to his feet as his consciousness returned to the physical world. "The Void Swarm," she said urgently. "They've arrived ahead of schedule. They're attacking the outer colonies." Emperor Valdris's patterns had shifted to the deep red of combat readiness. "All ships to battle stations. Prepare for immediate departure to the frontier systems." As chaos erupted around them, Marcus grabbed the Emperor's arm. "Your Majesty, the traditional Zephyrian battle tactics won't work against this enemy. They're a hive mind. They adapt to predictable patterns. You need unpredictability, creativity, the kind of chaotic thinking that humans excel at." "The trials are incomplete," the Emperor replied sharply. "You have not earned the right to advise on military matters. With respect, Your Majesty, there's no time for ceremony. The ancestor minds showed me something crucial. Your people once valued the same qualities that humans possess naturally. Those qualities are what you need now." Princess Lyrelai stepped between them, her patterns blazing with determination. "Father, Captain Chen is right. I've studied the tactical reports from the first Void Swarm encounters. They defeated every organized defense through adaptation and prediction. Only random, emotional responses seemed to cause them difficulty." The Emperor looked between his daughter and the human captain, his patterns cycling rapidly through different colors. Around them, the ship shuddered as it changed course toward the battle zone. "Very well," he said finally. "Captain Chen, you will accompany our fleet as a tactical advisor. But understand this. Your performance in the coming battle will serve as the final trial. Prove that human chaos can complement Zephyrian order, or both our species may fall to the approaching darkness." As the Zephyrian fleet moved toward its first confrontation with the Void Swarm, Marcus realized that everything had changed. The trials were no longer about proving his worthiness to marry Princess Lyrelai. They had become about proving that two very different species could work together to survive an existential threat that neither could face alone. The real test was just beginning. The Zephyrian battle fleet emerged from hyperspace to face a sight that chilled Marcus to his core. The outer colony of Thessarian Prime, once a thriving world of crystal cities and floating gardens, was now a burned husk surrounded by debris. Massive ships unlike anything in known space hung in orbit like mechanical vultures, their hulls black as the void between stars. "Void Swarm fleet detected," reported the tactical officer. 17 capital ships, over 200 smaller vessels. They're maintaining perfect formation around the planet. Emperor Valdris stood at the center of the command bridge, his patterns deep crimson with battle fury. "Deploy the fleet in Sigma formation. All ships target the largest enemy vessels and fire in coordinated volleys." Marcus watched the tactical display with growing alarm. The Zephyrian fleet moved with perfect precision, each ship taking its designated position in a formation that had served them well for thousands of years. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely predictable. "Your Majesty," Marcus said urgently, "that formation is exactly what they'll expect. The Void Swarm adapts to organized patterns. You need to break formation, attack randomly." "Impossible," the Emperor replied curtly. "Zephyrian naval doctrine has been perfected over millennia. We do not abandon proven tactics for human chaos." The first exchange of fire proved Marcus right. The Zephyrian weapons struck their targets with deadly precision, but the Void Swarm ships seemed to absorb the damage and adapt. Within minutes, the alien vessels had modified their shields to deflect the coordinated assault. Worse, they began moving in perfect counter-formations, predicting every Zephyrian maneuver. "They're reading our tactical patterns," Princess Lyrelai observed from her position at the sensor station. "Every move we make, they anticipate our next 3 moves. The battle quickly turned into a slaughter. The Void Swarm ships moved like a single organism, each vessel perfectly coordinated with the others. They surrounded isolated Zephyrian ships and destroyed them with ruthless efficiency. The beautiful precision of Zephyrian warfare became a liability against an enemy that could predict and counter every organized tactic. Retreat to secondary positions, the Emperor ordered as another Zephyrian cruiser exploded in a ball of flame. No, Marcus said firmly, stepping forward. Give me command of a squadron. Let me show you what unpredictable tactics can accomplish. Emperor Valdris turned to face him, patterns flashing with anger. You dare to question my command in the midst of battle. Father? Princess Lyrelai interrupted, her voice carrying desperate urgency. We're losing. Traditional methods aren't working. Perhaps it's time to try something different. The Emperor looked at the tactical display showing his fleet in retreat, then at the stubborn human who had somehow passed 2 impossible trials. Very well. Take command of the 5th Squadron. Show us what human chaos can accomplish against perfect order. Marcus moved to the communication station and opened channels to the 8 ships of the 5th Squadron. All vessels, this is Captain Chen. Ignore all formation protocols. I want each ship to choose its own target and attack method. No coordination, no pattern, just follow your individual instincts. The Zephyrian captain sounded confused and alarmed. Captain Chen, this goes against all tactical training. Trust me, Marcus replied, and trust yourselves. Don't think like a fleet. Think like individual hunters. The 5th Squadron broke formation and scattered across the battlefield like leaves in a storm. Each ship chose a different approach vector, different weapons, different timing. To Zephyrian observers, it looked like complete chaos. But the effect on the Void Swarm was immediate and dramatic. The alien ships, which had been perfectly countering every organized Zephyrian move, suddenly seemed confused. Their perfect formations wavered as they tried to predict 8 different attack patterns simultaneously. One Zephyrian captain, inspired by the freedom to act independently, performed a maneuver that would have horrified Fleet Command. He used his ship's hyperspace drive to make micro-jumps directly into the enemy formation, appearing and disappearing unpredictably while firing at point-blank range. Another captain began using his weapons in ways that violated every rule of efficient gunnery, firing random spreads instead of targeted volleys. The seemingly wasteful approach overwhelmed the Void Swarm's adaptive shields through sheer unpredictability. It's working, Princess Lyrelai breathed, watching as the 5th Squadron began destroying Void Swarm vessels. The enemy can't adapt to chaos. Emperor Valdris stared at the tactical display in amazement. How is this possible? Because the Void Swarm is a hive mind, Marcus explained while directing his makeshift squadron. They're perfect at coordinated response, but individual initiative confuses them. They can predict logical tactics, but not emotional, instinctive decisions. Encouraged by the 5th Squadron's success, other Zephyrian captains began breaking formation on their own initiative. Years of rigid discipline gave way to individual creativity, as captains rediscovered the joy of independent action. The tide of battle turned as the Zephyrian fleet transformed from a predictable machine into a swarm of independent actors. Each ship fought differently, chose its own targets, used weapons in unexpected ways. The Void Swarm, designed to counter organized military forces, found itself helpless against organized chaos. But victory came at a cost. The rigid hierarchy of Zephyrian society began to crack as officers made decisions without waiting for orders. Younger Zephyrians embraced the human concepts of individual initiative and creative problem-solving, while older traditionalists struggled to adapt. As the last Void Swarm vessels fled the system, Emperor Valdris called Marcus to his private chambers. The Emperor's patterns were neutral, giving no hint of his thoughts. Captain Chen, your tactics saved my fleet and liberated Thessarian Prime, the Emperor said formally. You have passed all 3 trials through methods that challenge everything our society believes about proper order. Marcus stood at attention, waiting for judgment. More troubling, the Emperor continued, your influence on my people has begun to change them. Officers are questioning orders, making independent decisions, thinking for themselves instead of following established protocols. Is that necessarily bad, Your Majesty? Marcus asked carefully. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his patterns cycling through complex colors. My daughter believes it is necessary evolution. She argues that our society has become too rigid, too predictable. Perhaps she is correct. Princess Lyra Lee entered the chamber, her patterns bright with anticipation. Father, have you reached a decision about Captain Chen's worthiness? I have, the Emperor replied. Captain Chen, you have proven that humans possess qualities that complement our own. Your chaos balances our order, your emotion enhances our logic, your unpredictability counters our rigid patterns. He paused, studying both his daughter and the human captain. But accepting your union would change our society forever. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Marcus looked at Princess Lyra Lee, seeing not just an alien princess but a kindred spirit who valued growth over stagnation, change over tradition. Your Majesty, the approaching threat is bigger than either of our species can handle alone. We need each other, not just as allies but as partners who can learn from our differences. The Emperor's patterns shifted to warm gold. The first time, Marcus had seen him display approval. Then let it be recorded that Captain Marcus Chen of Earth has completed the trials of ascension and proven his worthiness to join the royal bloodline of Zephyria. Princess Lyra Lee stepped forward and took Marcus's hand. Her bioluminescent patterns synchronized with his heartbeat, creating a new form of connection that transcended both telepathy and speech. But this is only the beginning, she said softly. Our union must become a symbol of cooperation between our peoples. Together, we'll create something neither species could achieve alone. The wedding ceremony took place on neutral ground, aboard a specially constructed station at the border between human and Zephyrian space. Representatives from both species witnessed the impossible becoming reality as two very different forms of consciousness joined in partnership. As they stood together, Marcus and Lyra Lee looked out at the combined fleet that would carry their message of cooperation to other worlds threatened by the Void Swarm. Their love had become something bigger than personal happiness. It had become hope for both species, survival. The stars awaited their next adventure and they would face it together.